So what is Plato's cave allegory about? Well, it is a very simple idea. We are like prisoners in a cave who basically see the shadows of objects that are presented to us from certain puppeteers, and we take the shadows to be face value what reality is. Our task, however, would be somehow to fight through to the source of light, the sun, and to see what it really is about. And here we have, of course, a lot of conspiracy theorists jumping onto the wagon and saying, yeah, exactly, because the government is cheating you or something. But I think Plato wants to go way deeper than to another uncritical position of somebody who says, you have to ask everything. You have to question everything, and then you will see this is all manipulated by the government, right? The puppeteers. But stopping there with critically questioning themselves, and that's maybe what it is about. So therefore, let's just jump in immediately to Book 7 of Plato's Cave Allegory, which is 514a. And he gives here a very clear description, right? He says it's a picture meant to explain what education is and our want of education. And he comes immediately up with the allegory, says, see human beings as though they were in an underground cave-like dwelling with its entrance, a long one, open to the light across the whole width of the cave. They are in it from childhood with their legs and necks in bonds, so that they are fixed, seeing only in front of them, unable because of the bond to turn their heads all the way around. Their light is from a fire burning far above and behind them. Between the fire and the prison there is a road above, along which see a wall built like the partitions puppet handlers set in front of the human beings, and over which they show the puppets. Now, of course, the question is, who are the puppeteers? Probably it is more skilled individuals who are engaged in the society, who abuse the cave dwellers. But certainly also, if we look into the picture again, the puppeteers are also not outside of the cave. So they are somehow mistreating the lower tier individuals, right? So now Plato reflects further on how these men in the cave would actually feel or how they would understand the world. So we make a little jump here to 515c. Then most certainly I said such men would hold that the truth is nothing other than the shadows of artificial things. Most necessarily said. Now consider, I said, what their release and healing from bonds and folly would be like if something of this sort were by nature to happen to them. Take a man who is released and suddenly compelled to stand up, to turn his neck around, to walk and look up toward the light, and who, moreover, in doing all this is in pain, and because he is dazzled, is unable to make out those things whose shadows he saw before. What do you suppose he'd say if someone were to tell him that before he saw silly nothings, while now, because he is somewhat nearer to what is and more turned towards beings, he sees more correctly, and in particular showing him each of the things that pass by, were to compel the man to answer his question about what they are. So yeah, just releasing a prisoner here from this scenario does not make him see what reality is, right? He would be just confused and dazzled. And this is also what Plato says, right? He would assume that what he has seen before is somewhat truer than what he sees right now. And this is a dilemma of truth of, let's say, more educated individuals who can never convince somebody who's uneducated that their view is a better view of what is. And Plato even goes further through the voice of Socrates, of course, and says, yeah, if we really dragged him to the source of light, he wouldn't see anything. He would just feel pain, because looking directly into the light for eyes that are not used to that light, that's just pain. Now we start another stage where he actually becomes accustomed, right? At first he most easily make out the shadows, and after that the phantoms of the human beings and the other things in water, and later the things themselves. And from here he could turn to beholding the things in heaven and heaven itself more easily at night, looking at the light of the stars and the moon, than by day looking at the sun and sunlight, of course. Then finally, I suppose, he would be able to make out the sun, not its appearances in water or some alien place, but the sun itself, by itself, in its own region, and see what it's like. So he becomes more educated, the pain of education is lessened, and finally he can even look at the sun. And under this condition of education, he would actually feel that he himself is happy compared with the prisoners who are still dwellers in the cave. Yeah, and Plato adds here in 516e that the knowledge of what he calls the steward of all things, that which makes all things, is actually worth the struggle before. I suppose he would prefer to undergo everything rather than live that way, the way of the cave dwellers, right? Now reflect on this too, and here's another stage in the allegory. If such a man were to come down again and sit in the same seat on coming suddenly from the sun, wouldn't his eyes get infected with darkness? So here's now another blindness. The first blindness was from the darkness to the sun, which is the problem of being uneducated. And now we come to the point where the educated cannot understand what these people in the darkness are doing anymore, and where the educated basically become very strange to them. And if he once more had to compete with those perpetual prisoners in forming judgments about those shadows, while his vision was still dim before his eyes had recovered, and if the time needed for getting accustomed were not at all short, wouldn't he be the source of laughter? And wouldn't it be said of him that he went up and came back with his eyes corrupted, and that it's not even worth trying to go up? And if they were somehow able to get their hands on and kill the man who attempts to release and lead up, wouldn't they kill him? No doubt about it, he said. So he comes back, and the cave dwellers are really saying, like, this guy is crazy, don't go up there. And they even would kill him for maybe turning them around or for telling them bullshit stories. And I think this is what we see in social media quite often, right? Somebody challenges a traditional concept that basically guides us in our shadow boxing activities, and a lot of people come out and just ridicule that guy. And that's why we all should not go to Twitter, I guess. So yeah, now he actually relates the cave allegory to an ontology of things, right? In the knowable, the last thing to be seen, and that with considerable effort, is the idea of the good. But once seen, it must be concluded that this is in fact the cause of all that is right and fair in everything. In the visible, it gave birth to light, and it's sovereign. In the intelligible itself, sovereign, it provided truth and intelligence, and that the man who's going to act prudently in private or in public must see it. Yeah, so we have here an ontology, we get to the idea of the good, or at least that's our goal. Plato does not say what that is through his voice of Socrates. And yeah, this is basically the outline of the cave allegory. The chapter, of course, goes further, where now we are asked, okay, what has to be done to get educated? We will also look into that. But I think for first lesson, it is enough to come until here. Yeah, and just to finish here, I actually also ask chatgpt to generate some thought-provoking questions. Not a huge fan of chatgpt, another shadow on the wall, right? But let's see what it asks us. So what is the significance of the prisoners in the cave being unable to turn their heads and only able to look straight ahead? How does this limitation affect their understanding of the world? Yeah, this is really a strange part, right? Wouldn't you notice that your view is so limited and so restricted to the shadows that it actually would hurt you? Wouldn't you want to move your body? So the question is how to interpret this, right? And probably it speaks about our uneducated body that does not move yet, like the body of the soul, let's see it like that, and it does not turn in the right direction. It's just turned in a direction where the way it is manipulated is at the same time crippling that body. Yeah, how does the allegory of the cave illustrate the idea that the world we see around us is only a shadow of the true ultimate reality? Yeah, I mean, somehow we are this biological organism that is constructed with regard to different tasks of survival and reproduction. And so I guess what we see is pretty much in alignment with a lot of these tasks that our biological or social organism has to fulfill. So for example, why does something taste sweet? Is it really sweet? Well, in a sense, it tastes sweet to convince us to eat that stuff, right? It's like a drug. But then the question is, what is sweetness itself, right? Isn't the sweetness something that is at the same time real? So the question is whether we really need a super reality behind these shadows, or whether reality is already in the phenomena that we are actually encountering. I'm a bit undecided on that, and I'm also not entirely sure whether Plato finally upholds an idea of super reality. So third, what does Plato suggest is the role of philosophical contemplation in helping us understand the ultimate reality of the world? I'm not sure if philosophical contemplation itself frees you from the prison. It seems you need a teacher. But once you have the right guidance and the right direction of your soul, I guess the contemplation means that you get rid of your desire for shadows and that you more and more reflect on that which is eternal and infinite, and which probably for that reason can intellectually also be infinitely be shared. So the role of philosophical contemplation is then to reduce our reliance on our shadowy desires, right? Our desires for shadows, for chocolate. That's what it means. I like the fifth question, by the way. What are the implications of the allegory for the way we think about education and the role of teachers and learners? And yeah, I think that a lot of people in the education business overestimate their role as educators and always act as if they are something better than their students, as if they are closer to the truth, and that they have to guide their students through the educational system. But the educational system itself became a prison. When we say something like lifelong learning, that sounds rather like a sentence than a prison sentence, right? Rather than a promise of freedom. You have to learn for the rest of your life. And if learning is about changing yourself and you do that lifelong, your task is actually to kill yourself for the rest of your life, right? Constantly becoming somebody else, a fluidity that does not obtain a stable soul anymore, that does not find the happiness in itself. And the stress is felt by a lot of people, right? So I think that educators often overestimate their role and by that just become another type of puppeteers. So the question would be, what is real education? And I'm not sure if that exists or whether we are just trapped in a biological prison, in a social conditioned biological prison that gives us these different tasks, and we're just hamsters running in a hamster wheel or rats in a rat race. That's a big question. And I don't really have an answer for that. And I think that a teacher who admits that he does not have these answers, he may be even closer to the ideal of Plato's cave allegory, as it was described here. Okay, so far so good. So this is Plato's cave allegory. I hope that was helpful for you in the discussion. What do you think? Do you think, no, that's bullshit. We have to get out to the sun. Like, education is good. It's really good. Man, you don't understand education.